The sky above was gray, thick with smoke and dust, in the center of the alien city. The slave market was crowded with noise, heat, and cruelty. Traders shouted prices, others laughed. And the smell of sweat and metal filled the air, cages lined. The streets each holding someone broken, scared, or silent. But one cage at the far end drew the most laughter. Inside was a girl, not quite human, not quite beast. Her fur was matted, brownish gold, and full of dirt. Her legs were long and thin like a mare's, with hooves where feet should be. Her ears twitched at every shout, and her golden eyes were dull. A long tail curled tightly around her as she sat, trying to disappear. The traders called her Filthy Mare. "She smells like rot," one man laughed. "Only good for pulling carts, not for anything else," shouted another. Even other slaves looked away from her, ashamed to share space. She hadn't spoken a word in days, not since her last master sold her off for scraps. Then he came, a human, walking slowly through the market, tall and calm. He wore old cargo clothes and had a backpack slung over one shoulder. He wasn't shouting, wasn't laughing, he was just looking. Silently, he passed by cages full of strong fighters, dancers and servants. But he didn't stop, not even once, until he reached the end where the Filthy Mare sat. He stood still in front of her cage, eyes locked onto hers. She looked up slowly, confused. No one ever looked at her like that, not with kindness, not even curiosity. His eyes didn't flinch at her fur or scars. He just whispered two words, softly, "I'll take her." The laughter around him exploded. A trader slapped his leg, nearly falling over. "You serious, human? One credit for that." "She can't even speak." Another added, "Her last owner dumped her. Said she bit him like an animal. She's worthless." Someone shouted, but the human didn't argue, didn't blink. He pulled out one credit chip from his coat and handed it over. "Paperwork," he said calmly. The trader shrugged, laughing, and handed him the key. "No refunds if she bites your face off," he joked. The human crouched and slowly unlocked the cage. The girl didn't move, her body trembled, too weak, too unsure. He didn't reach for her roughly. He took off his own jacket and wrapped it around her thin body. It was warm, soft, and it smelled like wood smoke, not metal. Then he gently lifted her in his arms. She was lighter than expected, bones more than muscle. The market went silent for a moment. People stared as he carried her through the crowd, holding her like something precious. She leaned her face against his chest, confused, her eyes blinking fast. No one had touched her gently in years. She whispered in a broken voice, "Why? Why me?" The human looked down and said softly, "Because you're not a mare. You're someone who deserves a home." They walked past sneering traders and wide-eyed slaves. Some shook their heads, others rolled their eyes, but no one stopped. Him, no one dared. That night, in a small house on the edge of the city, he laid her on a clean bed. He placed a bowl of warm soup beside her, lit a small fire in the corner, and, without saying much, left the room, giving her space. She watched him go, heart pounding. She didn't understand this man. He didn't chain her, didn't touch her wrong, didn't command her. She stared at the food, unsure. Was it real? Was this a trap? Her hands shook as she picked up the spoon. It had been so long since she'd eaten without someone yelling at her. Each bite was slow, careful, but the warmth spread through her body like a forgotten dream. Outside the room, the human sat quietly. On the couch, staring at the fire, he whispered to himself, "She'll be safe now, inside." The girl curled under the blanket, her tail uncurled for the first time in days. And though she didn't smile, her eyes stayed open a little longer. Before sleep came, for the first time in a long time, she didn't dream of chains. The room was quiet, except for the soft crackle of firewood. Kelia opened her eyes slowly, not sure if she was still dreaming. The ceiling was wooden, not metal, and the light was soft, not blinding. She touched the blanket gently, expecting it to vanish, but it stayed. Warm and thick against her trembling fingers. She sat up too fast and gasped. Her body still sore from old wounds. Her back ached, and her shoulder had a strange white cloth wrapped around it. Bandages, she realized, clean ones, the smell of something. Gentle filled the air soap, wood smoke, and something sweet. Not rust, not blood. She looked around the room, heart pounding. There were no chains, no buzzing fences, no collars on the wall. Instead, there was a table, 2 chairs, and folded clothes at the end of the bed. She heard soft footsteps from beyond the door and froze. Her breathing quickened, and her eyes darted toward the window, half ready to run, half ready to collapse. The door creaked open, and the human walked in holding a steaming bowl. He didn't look surprised to see her awake. He just gave her a small nod, walked to the table, and placed the bowl down. "I made stew," he said, voice calm and low. "No. Poison, I promise." She didn't speak, just stared at him, waiting for the trick, the sudden shout, the slap, but none came. He moved to the other chair, not too close, and sat down with his own bowl. "You don't have to eat," he added, "but it's better warm." He took a bite himself, slowly. As if to prove it was safe, Kelia's stomach growled, loud and sharp, and she blushed deeply under her fur. He didn't laugh, just pushed her bowl a little closer. "Still warm," he said with a gentle smile. She picked up the spoon with shaking hands, holding it wrong at first. He didn't correct her, just watched quietly. The taste made her eyes water. Not because it was bad, but because it wasn't. It was real food, not paste, not scraps, not leftovers thrown on the floor. She ate slowly, every bite feeling like something stolen, something forbidden. After a while, she whispered without looking at him, "What is this place?" He looked around as if surprised by the question. "My home," he said simply. "I built it myself, years ago." She nodded slowly, then asked, "Why? Why did you bring me here?" He leaned back in his chair, thinking, "Because you looked like someone who needed rest," he said, "and no one else was helping." She frowned, not understanding. I'm not human," she said, as if reminding him. "I know," he said softly, "and I'm not blind." Silence followed, broken only by the sound of firewood snapping. "I don't belong anywhere," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You do now," he said, not looking at her, but his voice was firm. "You can stay here as long as you want. And if you decide to leave, I won't stop you." She stared at him like he was speaking another language. Choices. Freedom. These were not words for creatures like her. That night, she sat by the fire alone, wrapped in his coat. He had left her a cup of warm tea and gone to the other room. No locked doors, no watching eyes. She could run, scream, break something, and he hadn't even flinched. She didn't understand him. Kindness was more frightening than cruelty because it made her hope. Later, as the night grew colder, she looked at the folded clothes again. Simple, clean, and soft. She took them and changed, moving slowly, half expecting punishment, but none came. She walked to the small window and looked out at the stars, so many of them, far and bright. She used to believe there was no place in the universe for someone like her. Now she wasn't so sure. When she lay down again, she didn't curl tightly this time. She let her tail stretch a little. Her arms loose. The blanket was heavier now, but not in a bad way. Her eyes stayed open for a long while, watching the flicker of the fire against the wall. Then she whispered a word she hadn't said in years. Her name, Kelia, she said. It again, like testing the sound, soft, broken, but still hers, in the other room. The human stirred but didn't speak. He had heard her, and he smiled in the dark. because that was the first step back to life. Morning came with soft light through the wooden window. Kelia sat on the edge of the bed, holding a cup of warm tea in her hands. She still couldn't believe this place was real. No chains, no shouting, no cold metal floor, only soft clothes, silence, and the strange man who had taken her away from the market of shame. The human returned from outside, carrying chopped wood in his arms. He looked at her, nodded once, and placed the logs beside the fireplace. "Cold night," he said. "You sleep all right?" Kelia didn't answer right away, her fingers tightening on the cup. After a moment, she gave a small nod, her eyes down. He didn't push her to talk. Didn't expect anything. He just started making breakfast eggs, bread, and something that smelled sweet. Kelia watched his back, confused. Why was he doing this? What did he want? No one ever gave without asking for something first. Not in her world. He placed a plate in front of her, then sat down at the table across from her. "I'll be heading into town later," he said. "You can stay here, or come with me, your choice." Her ears twitched, and she looked up at him quickly. "Why would I come?" she asked, her voice low. He smiled a little. "Didn't say you had to. Just thought maybe you'd want to see the world without bars." She lowered her eyes again, then slowly asked, "What's your name?" The question surprised him, but he answered, "Jonas." She repeated it quietly. "Jonas." Then she whispered, "My name is Kelia." He nodded, like he already knew. "I figured it wasn't Filthy Mare," he said with a dry smile. She flinched at the memory. But his voice wasn't mocking. It was soft, like he wanted to erase that name from her past. That day, she stayed inside, curled up by the fire. Jonas left the cabin, but not before saying, "Doors not locked. Food's on the table, see you tonight." Kelia stood frozen for a long time after he left. The door really wasn't locked. She could leave, run, vanish, just like that. But she didn't. Instead, she walked around the cabin, slow and unsure. She touched the books on the shelf, the tools hanging on the wall. She found a picture faded and old of Jonas with another human woman. Both smiling, she stared at it, wondering what happened to her, and why Jonas now lived alone. Later, she found an old mirror leaning against the wall. She looked into it, and her heart sank. The reflection showed a girl with tangled fur, sunken cheeks, and tired eyes. A creature, not a person. She reached up and touched her face, remembering what her mother once called her. Bright girl, strong heart. That was before everything was taken away, before her world burned and she was sold. The door creaked open again, and she jumped. But it was only Jonas. Carrying a cloth bag and whistling softly, he placed fruit and soap on the table, then looked at her. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, quickly looking away from the mirror. He followed her gaze, saw the mirror, and said, "That thing lies." "You know," Kelia frowned, confused. "It shows what others told you to see, not what's real," he said. Then walked away. That night, they sat across from each other near the fire. Jonas had made soup again, and Kelia had helped this time, chopping vegetables slowly, carefully. Her hands had shaken at first, but he didn't comment. Now she watched the flames, then whispered, "Why did you really take me?" Jonas was quiet for a long time, then said, "Because I saw someone drowning, and I couldn't walk past." Kelia swallowed, then said in a small voice, "You don't even know me." "I don't need to," he replied. "I just know what it feels like to be alone." Something in her chest moved then. Something heavy and cold for years. She didn't cry, not yet, but her eyes grew hot. She didn't speak again, but she didn't move away when Jonas placed a blanket over her shoulders before going to bed. When the fire burned low and the stars came out, Kelia looked up through the window. She touched her chest softly, right over her heart, and for the first time since she was taken as a child, she felt like she was still alive. The days passed quietly. and slowly, Kellia started walking around the house without fear. She even stepped outside a few times, always keeping the door in sight. Jonas never rushed her. Never followed, just let her breathe. She watched birds, touched the grass, and listened to the wind move through the trees. Sometimes she stood barefoot in the sunlight, just to feel it, as if proving she was not locked away anymore. Inside the house, she helped more each day. She swept the floor, washed dishes, and even smiled once when she caught Jonas humming while chopping vegetables. He smiled back, but didn't say anything. They had built something quiet between them. A space where words were not always needed. A strange peace. Soft and careful, like a glass cup on the edge of a shelf, one morning. While Kellia was folding the blanket on the couch, the sound of a vehicle approached. It wasn't Jonas's, and it wasn't friendly. The engine roared too loud, too fast. And the brakes screamed to a stop outside the cabin. Her ears twitched, her hands froze, and she turned toward the door as 3 loud knocks shook it. Jonas stepped in from the kitchen, his body tense. He gave her a small glance that said, "It's all right," but his jaw was tight. He opened the door, and 2 human patrol officers stood outside in black and blue armor. They had scanner devices on their belts and smirks on their faces. "Jonas Riggs?" one asked, already looking past him into the cabin. "Yeah," Jonas said calmly, blocking the doorway. "We got a report," the second man said. "Something about a hybrid female staying off-grid out here, unregistered, untagged." Jonas didn't blink. "No one here but me." Kellia stayed hidden behind the wall, her body pressed flat, heart pounding in her chest like a drum. Her mind screamed, "Run," but her legs wouldn't move. The officer pushed past Jonas, stepping into the house. The second followed, eyes scanning the room. They didn't even ask permission. They just entered like they owned the place. One of them saw the folded blanket, the 2 bowls on the table, and the still warm fireplace. He turned back. "You sure you're alone?" he asked with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Jonas stepped forward. "I said I was." The officer tilted his head. "Don't lie to patrol, Jonas." Last warning, just then. Kellia stepped out from behind the wall. She was shaking, but her chin was high and her tail steady. She didn't want Jonas to get punished because of her. The officers both turned, their eyes lighting up with sick amusement. "Well, well," one of them said. "So this is her." The other laughed. "She looks cleaner than I expected." Kellia didn't speak, just stared at them. Her hands clenched at her sides. "She's not yours," the first officer said to Jonas. "You don't have clearance for hybrids. She's not property." Jonas replied firmly, "She's a person." That made them laugh again, louder, crueler. "She's a thing, not a citizen, not even a registered one," the taller one snapped. "We could take her right now." Jonas moved between them and Kellia. "You'll have to go through me," he said, his voice low and cold. The air turned sharp, and for a second, no one moved. Kellia stared at his back, stunned. He was ready to fight for her. No one had ever done that before, not once, not ever. The officer narrowed his eyes, then smirked. "Careful, Jonas. Next time we won't be this nice." He turned and walked out, the other following close behind. They slammed the door behind them, and the sound echoed in the silence. Jonas stayed still for a few seconds before letting out a long breath. Kellia slowly walked toward him, her steps soft, uncertain. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you stand against them for me?" He looked at her, his face tired but honest. "Because no one else ever did," he said. "And you deserve more than silence." Kellia looked down, her voice trembling. "They'll come back," she said. "They always come back." "Then?" "We'll be ready," Jonas replied. Together, that night, the fire burned longer, and neither of them slept much. Outside, the cold wind howled, and the stars blinked above like old watchers in the sky. Inside, Kellia sat on the floor beside Jonas. her head resting lightly against his shoulder. She was still scared, but now she wasn't alone. She wasn't a thing, not anymore. She was someone worth protecting, and someone had finally said it out loud. Days passed, and the patrol didn't return. But their words stayed in Kelly's mind like old chains. She barely slept, waking at night to check the door, her ears twitching at every sound. Jonas noticed, but said nothing. He only added extra wood to the fire, sharpened the locks on the windows, and left a blanket near the front door just in case she needed comfort without asking. One morning, Jonas spoke softly over breakfast. "There's a festival in town," he said, not looking directly at her. Small gathering music, food stalls. Kelly looked up slowly, unsure if he was asking or warning. He added, "You don't have to come, but if you want, I'll be there with you." She didn't answer right away, but that night she stayed up. Staring at her reflection in the small mirror, she tied her mane back with a string of thread and tried brushing the fur around her cheeks. She didn't look like the Filthy Mare anymore. Still strange, still alien, but softer, stronger. Like someone becoming something new the next day. They walked down the dirt path together. Kelly wore a simple, pale green dress Jonas had sewn from old fabric. Her hooves clicked gently against the stone walkway. Children stared, adults whispered, and shopkeepers paused mid-sale when she passed. But Jonas never moved away from her side. He didn't flinch, didn't hide, didn't act ashamed. If anything, he looked proud, calm, and steady, like the wind against a flame at the center of the town square. Music played from wooden speakers, old human tunes mixed with alien rhythms. Slow and bright, a group of children played nearby, tossing a glowing ball through the air. One of them, small girl with pink ribbons in her hair, ran too close and tripped at Kelly's hooves. Kelly flinched, expecting the girl to scream or call her a name. But the child just laughed and looked up at her. "Are you a unicorn lady?" she asked innocently. People nearby turned to look, holding their breath. Kelly's heart stopped. Unsure what to say, but then the little girl stood and said, "You're pretty." Jonas smiled, and Kelly looked stunned. She crouched low and whispered to the girl, "Thank you." It was the first compliment she'd ever received without it being a lie or a trick. The music changed to a soft, dancing tune, and couples stepped forward to sway under the lights. Jonas held out his hand without speaking. Kelly stared at it, unsure, her body frozen with fear and memory. But then, slowly, she reached out, her fingers brushing his palm. He didn't pull her into the crowd, just let her follow step by step. They stood at the edge, swaying gently, not like dancers, but like survivors learning how to live again. Some people kept staring, but others smiled. An old alien woman with moss-colored skin approached and offered Kelly a flower. "You walk like someone who found peace," she said. Kelly took the flower with both hands. Trembling, she wanted to cry, but she didn't. Not here, not now. Not when so many eyes were watching her be free. Later, when the music faded and stars took the sky. Jonas and Kelly walked home under the quiet night. She held the flower to her chest the entire way. She didn't say anything until they reached the cabin. But then, just before stepping inside, she turned to him and asked, "Why didn't you dance with anyone else?" Jonas looked at her gently and replied, "Because I was waiting for you." That night, she didn't sleep near the fire. She didn't hide behind the couch or keep one ear open for danger. She lay on the bed fully, arms stretched out, blanket pulled to her chin. And when she closed her eyes, her heart was still beating fast, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was something soft, something new, something she didn't have a name for yet. The next morning, she woke before the sun. She opened the door and stepped outside alone, standing tall in the cool wind. Birds flew past, and for the first time, she didn't flinch. She looked back at the cabin, then up at the sky, and whispered to herself, "I'm not a mare." Then she smiled. I'm Kalir." The days after the festival felt different. Kelia moved through the house like she belonged. She no longer jumped at every noise or shadow. She laughed sometimes, soft and short, but real. And when Jonas smiled at her, she smiled back without. Lowering her eyes, she began taking walks alone, through the trees near the cabin. She learned how to fish, how to start a fire, how to cook simple meals. Jonas taught her everything with patience, never rushing, never correcting too harshly. He let her make mistakes, let her learn. He let her be free. One morning, Kelia returned from a walk with wild berries in her hands. She stepped into the cabin and stopped at the doorway. Jonas was standing in the middle of the room, holding something. Behind his back, he looked nervous, more nervous than she had ever seen him. She tilted her head, confused. "Is everything all right?" she asked. He nodded, then took a deep breath. "I've been thinking," he said, slowly. "About you, about us." Kelly's heart skipped, her ears twitched slightly. She took a careful step closer. Still holding the berries, he pulled his hand forward, and in it was a simple ring, made of twisted copper and silver wire. Not shiny, not expensive, but crafted by hand. He had shaped it with care, piece by piece. During quiet nights she didn't know about. "I know I'm just a human," Jonas said, "and you've been through more than I can ever imagine. But if you'll have me," he continued, his voice quiet, "I'd be honored to be your husband." Kelia didn't move, didn't blink. The world seemed to slow down around her. She stared at the ring, then at Jonas, then down at her own hands, her mind filled with memories of cages, of chains, of cruel voices calling her nothing. Of the day she was sold like trash, and now someone was offering her love, home, name, and choice. "I'm not like you," she said, voice cracking. "I'm not soft. I'm not pure." Jonas shook his head gently. "You're strong, you're kind, and you're more than enough." "I'm not asking for what you were," he added. "I'm asking for who you are." Now tears filled her eyes, hot and fast. She dropped the berries without noticing, and they rolled across the floor. Then she whispered, "I don't know how to be a wife." Jonas smiled, a little sad, a little hopeful. "Neither did I, until I met you," he said. He didn't kneel, didn't force the ring into her hands. He just waited. Kelia stepped forward slowly and took the ring, her hands shaking. She stared at it like it was made of fire. Then, without a word, she slipped it onto her finger. Her breathing hitched, and her knees gave way. Jonas caught her before she hit the floor, pulling her into a warm, steady hug. She didn't push away, didn't fight. She pressed her face into his chest and cried. Not the tears of fear or pain, but the kind of tears that wash something old away so something new can grow. They sat like that for a long time. When her crying stopped, she pulled back and touched the ring again. "Does this mean I'm yours now?" she asked in a small voice. Jonas shook his head and said, "No, this means I'm yours," he said, smiling gently. "If you want me to be." Kelia looked down at the copper and silver around her finger. She thought about the old market, about the name Filthy Mare, about the girl she was when they first met. And she realized that girl was gone. She had died in that cage. And someone else had been born here, in this cabin, with this man. That night, they lit candles and cooked a meal together. Just the two of them. There were no guests, no priest, no music. Only quiet promises spoken by firelight, and a touch of two hands resting gently on a table. Jonas said, "I'll never leave you behind." Kelia said, "I'll never forget who I was." And together, they said nothing more, because their hearts were already full. Outside, the stars watched, and somewhere deep in the woods, the wind carried her name, not the old one, but the real one, Kelia. The one who was no longer just surviving, the one who had finally been chosen, not sold. The wind was strong that morning, sharp and dry. Kelia stood at the edge of the village market, the same market where she had once been sold. She wore no chains now, no rags, no fear. She wore a clean cloak, sewn by her own hands, and a ring that caught the sun when she moved. Beside her stood Jonas, calm and steady, but quiet. Letting her lead, the market was louder than she remembered, filled with traders and villagers. But this time, no one shouted at her. No one threw rotten fruit or called her names. She had returned not as property, not as prey, but as someone whole. Whispers followed her as she walked. Some mouths spoke. The old name behind her back, Filthy Mare. Others stared in silence, remembering her as nothing more than a creature in a cage. But none dared say it to her face. Her posture was too strong now. Her steps too firm, her eyes too clear. Near the center of the stalls, she saw him. The old trader who sold her. The one who laughed as he took the single credit from Jonas. He sat on a crate, eating, not noticing her at first. But when he looked up, the food fell from his hand. He stood slowly, blinking as if she were a ghost. "You," he muttered. "You were that thing I sold off." Kelia stepped forward, her voice calm. "I was," she said. "And you laughed when he took me." The man gave a nervous chuckle, scratching his neck. "Well, it was just business. Nothing personal." Kelia didn't raise. Her voice didn't glare. She just asked, "Do you still think I was worthless?" The trader didn't answer. He looked at her clothes, her clean fur, the way people moved aside for her. He looked at Jonas, who stood beside her like a shield made of quiet strength. And for the first time, the man said nothing. Kelia turned away, not needing his answer because she already knew it as she walked through the crowd. People parted without a word. Some lowered their eyes. Others looked at her with new understanding. A few even nodded small gestures of quiet respect, and at the edge of the market, a little girl tugged on her mother's sleeve and whispered, "Mom, is she a queen?" Kelia heard it, but didn't stop, not because she was angry, but because she finally believed something she never thought she would. She was more than what they called her. She always had been. That night, back at the cabin, she stood outside. With Jonas, looking at the stars, he put a hand on her shoulder, gentle as always. "You didn't have to go back," he said softly. "I know," she replied, "but I needed to." She turned to him and smiled. "I wanted them to see what they left behind. I wanted them to see what one person's kindness can build." Jonas looked at her with pride in his eyes. "You built it," he said. "I just gave you space to grow." Kelia rested her head against him, her heart steady. She thought about the girl she used to be, dirty and cold, curled inside a cage. She thought about the day he whispered, "I'll take her," and how that one moment changed everything. Now, she was not a slave, not a beast, not a forgotten thing. She was a wife, a healer, a woman with her own name. And no one could take that from her ever again. The wind blew softly through the trees, and the stars burned bright above them. Jonas reached for her hand, and she laced her fingers through his. She looked up at the sky and whispered with a smile, "They all mocked me as Filthy Mare, but one human saw something else." She squeezed his hand, her voice quiet but strong, "and he made me his wife."